Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. Some of Wales's town centres are in decline. They face complex challenges which are sometimes unique to specific places. That was one of the introductory lines to the Welsh Government's latest town centre position statement. Regeneration has been a major part of the Welsh Government's remit throughout devolution, a seemingly never-ending cycle of policies, action plans and strategies. Joining us tonight to reflect on all things regeneration, and in particular last week's statement, are Owen Davies, a regeneration consultant, founder of Owen Davies Consulting and Abergavenny co-working site Gwagle. Owen is also an expert at the High Street Task Force. Hello, Owen.
Hi there.
We also have Victoria Mann, CEO at NearMeNow, a sector-leading innovator in digital destinations and smart town ecosystems, and a business council member at the Cardiff capital region. Hello, Victoria.
Hi, Sue. Thanks for having me.
Ooh, pleasure. So for the uninitiated, we've got, Kerry of this parish as well is a big regeneration geek. But for those who are not so familiar, what do we mean when we say regeneration? Victoria, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, for me, our work within towns has allowed us to really get to the heart of, what regeneration means to us. At the heart of everything for us is about the people. People make places, essentially, and the relationships that exist within those places. And whilst, there's infrastructure, politics, and all things in between that come into that, all of those different players, those actors, those stakeholders within a place contribute to the regeneration and ensuring that all of those assets, local people, all working towards the same goal, if you like, is our definition of regeneration. I
agree with everything that Victoria said. I think having been in the world of regeneration for nearly 30 years, I think it's worth distinguishing between what regeneration is and what I would see as economic development. So I see regeneration is that we're trying to work with places that have something that's not working well. There's a kind of a point of failure. Normally it's to do with kind of property market failure, things that everybody kind of comments on, like vacancy rates, poor quality offer, prevalence of charity shops, or those kind of key indicators that people see on their high street. So that would kind of be seen as something that's not working well, a kind of a failure, increased competition from out of town and the like. And I know it's just worth mentioning, whereas I kind of see economic development is in distinct difference to that, is where you kind of have something that's going well and you want to kind of advance it much further. But I kind of see in terms of town regeneration, we're dealing with places that have something that's not working quite right at the moment. And I think that's really important.
Where are we in Wales with such regeneration schemes, Owen? We seem to have a long history of this, don't we? Whether that's Cardiff Bay, SA1, Real Seafront. We do seem to have quite a lot of development going on.
Yeah.
Times, but how much does that make? How much impact is that making in terms of real regeneration and economic development?
As a university student of the 90s, and I kind of thought then that Wales had kind of invented regeneration. We were kind of leading experts in our field. Back in the days, some might say good old days when we had the WDA and the like, and we were seen as kind of a market leader in the UK, even in Europe, in terms of how we approached regeneration. I think we've kind of got a really long track record of it in Wales and a fairly mature understanding of what it means and how we go about it. I think we're very good, as you may have heard me say recently, that at kind of writing the policies and the strategies that back that up. But since devolution, I would say the challenge around delivery have become probably stronger because, of course, we don't have quite as much resource to draw on and maybe don't necessarily have the legislative influence to kind of change things in the way that we might want to do that. But, we can look at Cardiff Bay, we can look at, Newport was once a kind of regeneration zone with its own regeneration agency. We still have enterprise zones in Wales, although they probably lack the teeth that you see in England. But our towns programme has been a kind of like a consistent thread, I think, that's run through that. So, Kerry, you might remember all the different titles, but we're now in Transforming Towns. We've had various reiterations of towns focused regeneration in Wales for 20, 30 years. And that's good. I kind of think, we need to see each time we create that program is what differences are they really driving forward? What's the innovation? What's the new policy drivers that sit behind that? So that's kind of my broad view on that, really.
Yeah, everything that Owen said, we're very good at writing a lot of strategies, and even with the statement that came out this week, it feels as though what we're doing there is reestablishing something that might have been said in the past, town centre first policy. And we're looking at reaffirming that. And if that's, what this is aimed at doing, then that's fantastic. That's exactly what we need. And whether or not that's reaffirming it in order to say, maybe we haven't been doing it as well as we could have been, then fantastic. But like Owen said, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of policies, a lot of strategies, statements. And we do seem to be in that constant cycle of regeneration. And I know there's been discussion around infrastructure as well. So like the Wales infrastructure investment strategy, which lends itself to, like Owen said, I mentioned regeneration for me personally is about places and people. Infrastructure is a key part of that, absolutely. And I see that sitting with public sector, with policymakers. But regeneration often comes from the heart of the community and the people that are there. So there are two parts to this. If we're continuously talking about what the aims of these sort of regen is and what the strategies in place are, then great. But I think we need to start putting these things into action, because there's been a lot of discussions. Some of the things coming through from the FSB report, even back to 2018, where they were looking at, the 6 C's, cohesion, culture, and civic, and there's another 3 as well, connectivity, college, commercial, and culture. They were, I would add to that and probably put construction in, because Owen's just said infrastructure as part of regen as well. And yeah, I see that sitting with policymakers. There's a lot of talk, but actually the action is based on the ground with the people who are implementing, and policy should support that, putting that into practice now with the teams of people, volunteers often, and the public sector people that are closer to the ground to implement. And I'm not seeing enough of that joined up approach. So yeah, time to look at the strategies and start implementing them on the ground.
And you just summed up an awful lot of my career in regeneration there, Victoria. We do a lot of strategy. We do a lot of delivery, but I think a lot of people would agree with that. We need to do more rather than just talk about it. And just as a geek, Owen, you mentioned about we seem to always do regeneration. And in one of the pieces of work I once did, the first example of regeneration I could find in Wales was in Merthyr in 1790, believe it or not. So we have a long history of regeneration in Wales.
Was that you personally, Kerry?
It was an earlier job, Matt. Yeah. Oh, you youngsters. Okay. We seem to produce a lot of those documents, Victoria, as you just mentioned, and last week's announcement is the latest in a long line of those well-meaning documents. I'm not sure if you're familiar enough with it yet to tell us the main points that came out of that. Have you or Owen looked at it in enough detail to pull those out?
Well, I have. It's kind of something I've been doing today, because I'm kind of helping to regenerate some towns in Mid Wales, some that are very close to you, Kerry, Talgarth. I'm going to start working in fairly soon, so I'm sure you'll be able to give me some amazing insights to that tiny town.
For anyone local in Talgarth, we'll ask you what is going to happen to the Mid Wales Asylum, which has been derelict for the best part of 25 years. And it's a fantastic building. We can talk about this off air.
No, I know. I've got my big boots on ready for tomorrow, so I'm going to be trouncing around that area. I've been already told I need to prepare myself for that. But I was looking at it today. Actually, I had to do this for the kind of the day job. But we've done from our project point of view is we kind of pulled out from the policy statement what we think are like the research questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're looking at towns. So things like there's fairly clear kind of observations in the policy statement about what's happened with the shift of things out of town. Now, we all know of out of town retail developments, don't we? They've been around for 20 years and the policy's gradually been tightening up on that. But it's kind of to what extent of kind of civic and service functions relocated. So I'm really interested because I've seen this in a number of places where we're working, where you can see that kind of urgency to kind of preserve your library, for example, has meant that it's kind of had to be relocated to another building, which is usually where there's kind of a day-to-day use and a kind of a way of sustaining it. And they can, in most cases, be like schools and stuff. So we can see that happening. Now, that's a really big policy challenge and a financial challenge for local authorities, isn't it, about keeping a service, but maybe it has to move out of town. So I kind of see Welsh Government kind of pointing the finger here and saying, is this the right thing that's happening? But, is there the money there to back this up, to kind of say, look, if you make a positive decision around keeping your services in town centres, can we give you an extra premium to maintain that service there, or is it about, needs must and the like? So we can see some of that. I also find it quite interesting that they refer to some that I'm quite fond of as an issue, is this idea around property issues that, our town centres, I always say, in most cases, almost all cases, the public sector don't own the town. The town is actually owned by a fragmented array of private individuals who own individual properties and buildings. And in most cases, they are local, kind of grounded individuals who have a real vested interest in the future prosperity of their town. But we also know that there can be, in some cases, really problem properties, maybe a large number of them, where they're absentee landlords, don't have those roots in the ground and really don't see, we don't see them involved in regeneration. So Welsh Government kind of flagged that up, which I think is fairly useful. There's a lot of stuff there that I think we probably all kind of buy into around people and movement, around the accessibility of our towns. People can get to towns easily if they can walk and cycle. Then these are great advantages for town centres. But what was quite interesting, another kind of policy kind of driver behind that was this kind of reinvention of kind of regional transport planning, which we kind of had in Wales really maturely for a while, and it kind of lost its kind of focus. And I can see some of that coming back. And then there's a really interesting thing in there about climate and a natural emergency. So there's a really clear statement in there about, is your town centre at risk of flooding? Have you got sufficient flood defences to enable the town to grow and develop? I'm sure there's going to be some fairly interesting conversations around places that have been calling for fairly expensive flood defence schemes over many years that haven't had them, and they'll be making the regeneration case, well, we need this for our future of our high streets. So I think that's going to be quite interesting as well. And then something that Victoria's mentioned, which I think is absolutely key and critical to this, the local capacity to deliver. They make a really clear statement, don't they, about who's involved, how well is it going, and is there a need for a stronger partnership? And we all know that that is absolutely key to how town centres grow and develop. So those are kind of the key areas that I saw jumping out at me from the policy statement, which I can't argue with, but I kind of think they could have gone a lot further. And I don't know if you want to talk about the gaps now, but maybe we can come on to that in the future. But I kind of think there's some really obvious things that could have been in there that aren't at the moment.
I will come back to the gaps, but Victoria, I think Owen did a really good summary for us there. It shows he definitely is reading what Welsh Government are putting out. Was there anything in particular which stood out for you from what was put out last week?
Yeah, I'm sort of going to reiterate some of the stuff that Owen said, but I'll add a little bit of a different slant on that. So in terms of the out of town retail centres, Owen used the phrase a little bit of finger pointing, and they talk a little bit about private sector looking at the areas that are more commercially viable for them. I think there should be a shared responsibility here, because they wouldn't be placed out of town if there wasn't, if planning didn't allow for that. We are where we are. And I think there needs to be a collaborative approach to kind of going, okay, that might not have worked. It probably isn't the best policy for our town centres, but certainly no finger pointing as to, why this has evolved over a period of time, and that they put in the right things in place to reaffirm. And that was one of the biggest things I mentioned earlier, reaffirming that town centre first policy. And there's a couple of examples that I've witnessed over the last couple of years post-pandemic, where they could have placed something in the centre of town where it hasn't been placed, and have been party to some of those discussions as to the three options that are available, and it wasn't a town centre when that was chosen. That was actually a Welsh Government building as well. So I'm looking at that going, okay, is this them taking it, reflecting on their own activity, which is great. Sometimes it's about sticking your hand up and saying, maybe we weren't doing this to the best of our ability, and good on them for reaffirming that. So that message is then delivered to everyone within planning and within those institutions to make sure that it's, delivered in that way. So a reaffirmation is very welcomed. And then the gaps in delivery. This is something very close to my heart. I think there is a gaping hole in some of the stakeholders that were listed there. There is a big gap. If we look at the delivery partners within towns and who they actually are, the people who are closest to the businesses. So I always look at public sector down to, say, your economic team within a local council. They're responsible for multiple towns. It's those people that have got boots on the ground, that understand each individual business, that are active within a town, and they can be varied. They can be a local business improvement district, they can be a chamber of trade, town councillor, a mayor in some places. But in some towns, they are just enthusiastic local business people who have got a lot of respect from the other business owners, and they tend to drive a lot of that local activity and delivery of events, things that really drive footfall to the area, local initiatives, whether they're festivals, whether they're local markets. And what we're seeing is that our collaboration on the ground isn't always happening in the best way that it could. I'd like to see that group of people that we refer to as town stakeholders represented and some sort of support for them. So they weren't listed as part of the stakeholders within that project. And I think there's this big gap between public sector then and the business owners, and it's filled by people, and that needs to be recognised, and the part that they play on their high streets. So delivery of some of these things, making sure that they're implemented, and as I said earlier, and it's throughout everything I say, it's the people that make the places. And whilst all of these infrastructure discussions are fantastic, buildings alone won't cut it. It has to be about place and about people and the offering there in that destination, so that we can say, you know, where are you going on your holidays? I'm going to the Lake District, I'm going to the Cotswolds, or I'm going to the South Wales valleys. We need this to be destination valleys, destination Wales. Buildings alone won't create that. We need to make sure that we empower local people to really help regenerate and create that sense of place that will make people want to come.
Well, I can highly recommend a 10-year-old Welsh Government strategy called Vibrant and Viable Places, Victoria, because that's exactly what we try to do with that strategy. And you're more than welcome to have finger pointing tonight, because having worked in this area, having Welsh Government put out of town developments in Llandudno Junction, Merthyr and Aberystwyth, the frustration by officials in Welsh Government at our own actions was large. And I think that was still going on relatively recently with, I think it was Qualification Wales has gone out of town in Newport, and it's just so frustrating. Owen, you mentioned you had gaps as well. Do you want to feed those in?
I mention these because I know, one, I think we're doing really well at them in Wales, but two, that officials have actually been thinking about it as well. So I'd like to see progress. So something that's very close to Victoria's heart, and also an area that we've been doing a lot of work in recently, is the whole smart towns agenda. Without getting into the kind of baffling world of technology, I kind of think, you know, there is an area that Wales is leading on in terms of kind of developing a knowledge base, building awareness, knowing that this is kind of future-proofing our town centres and our communities, which is about how digital and data can be a real kind of advantage and leverage for us. So Wales has been doing this for a couple of years in terms of the Smart Towns Cymru programme, and I'd like to have seen mention of that in this. It doesn't get a mention at all, and I kind of think that's a missed opportunity, even if it's just to fly the flag and say, look what we're doing in Wales. And I know the whole visitor app that Victoria's closely involved in is absolutely at the centre of that kind of world that we're trying to create. So I that was probably the first thing I go, oh, where is it? Have I missed it? I had to go back through and read it again. And then we do have to kind of take some kind of fairly innovative, kind of groundbreaking approaches to delivery. We would need to do in some places, we need to regenerate at scale, and that means doing things that we know have been done in Wales before and are being done elsewhere in the UK, which is around, it might sound fairly mechanical, but can we compulsory purchase areas that are failing to really get the public sector and the community driving forward change in that area? Do we kind of create regeneration agencies in our towns that can kind of be the kind of that very commercially minded but very community grounded agencies for change in our town? So I kind of think there's something in Wales that we can do that feels very Welsh, the way that we want to do it in Wales. In a way, I'm going to get slightly historical about this, but if we think about what happened back in the industrial age of Wales, it was the community and the coal miners and the coal owners that invested in libraries, invested in schools, invested in community facilities, and drove growth and development in their towns. We have a spirit of that in Wales. Why can't we be creating agencies that have a real commercial focus but community minded in Wales, in our town centres? I think there's something there that we could be starting to think about in Wales as well. And so I'd like to see something there, even if it's to say we would like to move in this direction. And we're going to try and see how we do this without necessarily defining how we're going to do it yet. But I'd like to see some movement on that, I think. I think Wales invented regeneration, and we should be at the forefront of innovation in that field. For a small nation, we can do big things, I think.
So we talked a little bit about the impact that out-of-town shopping's had on retail and local economies, but I think one of the biggest changes we've seen in the last 20 years or so is the development of e-commerce and the ease that people find when shopping on Amazon or even on online versions of previously high street stores. So how would you say that the Welsh high street, the Welsh town, has dealt and adapted to the proliferation of online options? And how do you tackle that if you do think that it is a massive drain on town centres and high streets? Owen?
I think Victoria is probably much more rooted in this, I think, but I'll give you my perspective. I think it has, there are winners and losers, aren't there? And I kind of think the big retail brands have kind of had to retrench from lots of town centres because they're kind of selling online, but they need to be present on the high street. So they're doing that in big regional centres and city centres. So we're kind of seeing the loss of those businesses from, smaller regional towns. And in the final analysis, we probably think that's a good thing, but we're still dealing with the kind of the vacancy. I think in terms of what that means for small, independent, local businesses is that, we know that the best businesses on our high street are selling online and also to customers on the street. And we should see our small independent businesses having global reach, selling and trading with potential across the UK and the world, as well as selling to customers from their own town. So it's an opportunity, and we know that there's that skills gap, confidence gap that exists in terms of where our businesses and their digital skills are as well. But there are really good examples of businesses that have kind of gone from kind of the bricks and mortar to clicks and really trading phenomenally well with that. And we know that COVID had a kind of an accelerating effect on some businesses, but not all. And I think that's the bit, what we don't want to do is see some businesses left behind just because they don't quite have the right skills and confidence in that. What it also means is that we might see our town centres looking slightly different, or we might have to try and resolve some of these things. So we might have a business that has a smaller kind of floor plate for selling stuff on the street, but they actually need a lot more back office for storage and distribution. They might even need better access for vehicles and deliveries to come in and out of the town, to pick up goods, to distribute them across the country or even across the world. So I kind of think it's going to kind of be a physical kind of challenge and change with that, particularly with our kind of traditional high streets and, where sometimes access to the town centres isn't that great. So I kind of think it's an opportunity. We have to accept it. It's here and now. It's not going to go away. And it's not all bad news. It's just that we need to really work in the areas where it maximises the advantages for our independent businesses, I think.
Yeah, everything Owen said, and a little bit more from our perspective as well. Whilst you've got businesses that we encourage to trade both in bricks and mortar and online, my argument there would be, if there is no incentive for them to have a bricks and mortar business, then, what's stopping them from then trading from a local industrial estate and actually, managing their logistics maybe more effectively. There are some great examples of some blended approaches to that. Seren Bach up in Treorchy, Andrew Berry up in Ystrad Mynach as well, who's a jeweller, and he's got his own YouTube channel as well. Now, from the research that we did with as part of our Welsh Government project, we were looking at this as a particular challenge, if you like, for high streets and how high streets themselves are digitally marketed. And from what we experienced, only around about 20% of businesses on a high street actually want to actually have products that they can actually trade online. So if you go into a small homeware store, if you go into a local pharmacy, if you go into a local giftware shop, their products are they have such an array of products that actually managing those and having some sort of electronic inventory for them to be able to manage all of that is really beyond the digital needs that they actually have. So there's a balance between having that bricks and mortar business, being able to have a lot of products that make it interesting for people to come in and products that people want, and having the staff and the resources to manage that. So I always equate it to, you're not going to expect your greengrocer to put a barcode on all of his tomatoes, for example. And one pharmacy that we were working with, when we talked to them about electronic inventories, they kind of said, take a look around. There was an array of different gifts there in readiness for Christmas. And they said, to get a member of staff to go around and actually manage these stock levels so that we can trade online as well would be a huge challenge. And then you've got the likes of Seren Fach, an amazing gift store for babies within Treorchy, all locally produced. You know, they're promoted locally. They've got a great online presence. And when we talk to them about their electronic needs and e-commerce needs, because of the tailor-made approach and the bespoke element to their products, they really wanted that personal relationship with their customers as well, that e-commerce alone often can't deliver. And local florists are telling us the same. So we understand, naturally, as everyone here does, that the destination and a place isn't just about the retail element. And if we focus too much on e-commerce, it can be a little bit about that. E-commerce will also encourage those small businesses to stand on their own, to work in silos, someone sitting at home on a sofa visiting one e-commerce platform. So if we are going down the route of e-commerce for a destination, you need to be able to shop your entire town in one basket. And that's part of what we've been working towards there as well. And another thing that came out of the discussions and our research was, you know, taking a look at some of these big players. Naturally, Google, if you want to search for something, you search for flowers in Treorchy, and naturally Interflora is the one that sort of comes top of that search. We accept that. We accept that our search engines are promoting our destinations and what's available and selling that spot at the top to the highest bidder. We also accept that each individual business has a Facebook page. A lot of us know that all of that content, or 95% of it, is lost to the ether and people don't see it. Yet we're asking these small businesses to create all of this content that is then lost as well. So there needs to be a different approach to digital. E-commerce is just one feature. It needs to be as a destination so that, you know, your local click and collect, your local delivery, that infrastructure needs to be put in place and could be a huge draw then for people who work away maybe in the city, in Cardiff, and then are coming home and they can pick things up from a local click and collect. Really support their small businesses that are local. Or, you know, in terms of isolation, people who haven't got that level of mobility to reach their high street, they need to be able to know that they can shop their high street, support local, and have that delivered to them as well. But I really want to see a move to destination selling and promotion of other businesses with services, retail businesses that don't have the need for e-commerce, and for that e-commerce to slip in as a feature rather than actually be the main draw for that as well.
Owen, I'm intrigued on your thoughts on how we square the circle between the sort of direction of travel we've got at the minute with town centre planning, which tends to be get the cars out of them, more active travel, more pedestrianisation. How do we square the circle with making places pleasant to be, but also have it so that the businesses that are there presently can trade and, you know, the infrastructure surrounding them that enables them to be thriving businesses?
I think it's a point of tension in most small towns. You know, if you're Cardiff, Newport, Cumbraen, Wrexham and like, you know, you can kind of call the shots if you're a big business, kind of say, you know, in terms of where you are on the kind of the delivery pickup kind of schedule, you can probably do that really effectively. Our smaller towns can't really call quite the same shots. So we also got that tension if you kind of want to kind of minimize vehicles large, and we're talking about goods deliveries, aren't we, rather than through traffic. But if you want to minimize those in your town centres, you know, there's a practical reality to this. You know, some businesses need to get things distributed, and that delivery might be at 12 o'clock. So it is, because, you know, we've got historic towns, not really fit for purpose in terms of the way that transport and distribution works these days. So yeah, each town, we need to kind of design their own solutions. You know, been doing some work in Builth Wells recently. Kerry, you'll know it very well. Remarkable town, holding up really, really well. I had the most awful experience with the amount of traffic that went through the town centre. I mean, the air quality was really quite noticeable. But at the same time, you look at the shops and you go, I want to spend time here. There's some really nice things to do here, but the traffic going through, and that's just the reality of the way that Builth Wells is, you know, the solutions to that are enormously expensive, but there's ways of mitigating that to be resolved, I think. But just use that as one example, you know.
I want to also talk just a bit about the brass tacks of it all, really. So one of the best tools available to local government, to Welsh Government, is sort of the work they do with rates and non-domestic rates, making it so that the businesses are, you know, viable, don't have to, you know, the businesses that aren't making money don't have to also pay this huge burden in non-domestic rates. Do you think that Wales is adequately using all the sort of fiscal and financial levers we have available to us to support businesses into town centres? And do you think there's more that could be done? Victoria, I see you're shaking your head, so I'm going to go straight to you.
Yeah, these haven't been reviewed properly since before the advent of e-commerce, and why should the online giants actually benefit when our small businesses are actually contributing to society a lot more by being the beating heart of communities? So I would like to see that. What the answer is to that, I don't know. When you say, what levers they can actually pull, there needs to be a consideration of rates of those online businesses and online trading. And whilst they're fantastic for the economy, the consideration of the detriment of our places should be considered there as well.
Oh, and we've seen a lot recently from the Welsh Government talking about potentially in the future moving away from using council tax and non-domestic rates, but moving to a system of land value tax. What kind of impact do you think that would have on businesses? Are businesses right to be a bit trepidatious about this change, or do you think it may eventually benefit them?
I think businesses will be cautious about change, but I think there's probably a consensus amongst businesses and politicians that the current system isn't fit for purpose either. I think it's a little bit like the experience we had with changing from household rates to council tax, which had the poll tax in between. There's going to be a real kind of tension around change because there's going to be winners and losers, and it will be based on kind of some sort of sense of revaluation of what our commercial property in our town centres offer. I've kind of been witness to conversations that the ATCM have been developing ideas that they're pitching to UK government on this, and they're also kind of saying, blimey, this is really hard. Whatever solution we devise is going to be really challenging to get political buy-in and for the business and private sector to buy in too. So I think that's why we've had inertia on business rates, because everyone agrees it's rubbish, but the alternative is going to be really difficult to deliver. We need to capture the online spend element of business growth and investment. So how do we do that? And is it based on some kind of trading turnover performance based? I kind of think there is an incentive in any kind of taxation system if it's based on sales and performance as opposed to what the building is around you and how much that might be worth, because we know that bears no relationship to the P&L of any business on the high street. So I think it's one that really does need properly. And we know, and didn't we had a review of business rates in Wales done by a range of experts 5-6 years ago, maybe. We're now we're just going through another consultation in Wales on business rates. I think we need to put some ideas out there to test and challenge, don't we? For them to be scrutinised and then for people to come up with alternatives. At the moment, there is no kind of alternative being put out there to kind of say, this is what it might look like. What do you think?
So you're sort of touching on it, but I wanted to ask directly. Obviously, this probably wouldn't be in the gift of the Welsh Government, but are we talking about the creation of an online sales tax essentially that sort of tries to level the playing field between online and sort of bricks and mortar retailers?
I think there has to be some kind of fiscal measure like that eventually.
Yes, leveling the playing field and consideration of as I said earlier, the contribution that those bricks and mortar businesses make to society well-being and all the things we've mentioned. Otherwise, are we just encouraging them to then trade online from a warehouse nearby? That's the danger then, if that isn't a measure that is considered and implemented.
I know there's a number of angles we can go with this, but I think there are some improvements we can make to the current business rate system that would start to make an immediate difference or visible difference on our high street. One really interesting one, which some people know about, some don't, is that if you're a listed building and you're empty, you don't pay business rates. You get you don't have to pay empty rates if you're a listed building. Most of our towns are historic. Most of our towns have listed buildings. And what we find is we have these long-term vacant properties that landlords can afford to sit on because they're not getting a rates bill to pay. And there's no incentive for them to see reoccupation. So I kind of think we need to look at that, because the purpose of it was to kind of to allow the property owner to invest in its listed building to maintain the heritage quality but we know that never happens. So we kind of need to look at that. And I'm here in Abergavenny, and there's been in a town that's, let's be honest with you, really thriving. but there's been a building near to where my office is that's been empty for about 5 or 6 years. Everyone's going, why, in a town where people are crying out for property, why isn't that being brought forward? It's a listed building. The owners can sit on it. There's no penalty for that. And I kind of think we do need to look at that. So it's just one example where we can make small changes that could make a difference to our high streets. And I think, you know, even if the long-term solution to business rates is yet to be defined, let's start making whatever improvements we can to it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We've been having a discussion about sort of vacant land taxes in Wales for a long time, haven't we? Sort of you don't want empty plots of land, but at the same time, you don't want perfectly good buildings not being used because it's not costing anyone anything to have them just sitting there. I'm going to shut up now and hand over back to Kerry.
No, I love what we're saying, because I've done a few Twitter threads recently. There's places on Swansea High Street which have just been derelict for as long as I can remember. And I was in Aberystwyth recently, and there's a few on the front, and it just spoils the whole vista of an awful lot of places. And it is something which really needs to be addressed. It's such a quick win for me. Owen, I think you mentioned COVID. I think COVID has had a big impact on everything we've talked around tonight, about how e-commerce has developed, but also how people live and work and the impact that's had on traditional town centres. You know, you run a co-working site, and I think Gwagle's a great idea, very much in the model of IndieQ that I was very much part of. And what we tried to do was to bring people into town centres in places like Porth and Newtown, Swansea, Cardiff, a lot of places around Wales. We're in a massive cultural change post-COVID. Do you see that as a boom to our kind of regional towns, where people now can perhaps work more locally, even if it's at home or remote working?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've kind of got the day-to-day experience of this. I set up it was my side project, which I set up the year before COVID, and we just celebrated our first 12 months, and we had our first lockdown. So I kind of got experience of before and now after. Look, having a conversation with somebody in the office today who's kind of moved to the area from Bristol, moved to a lovely area of Wales because he wants to be in this environment, but he's working globally, and he comes into our office twice a week. And today he bought some carpets from the carpet shop in town because he could go there at lunchtime and order them, whereas he might have gone somewhere else. And it's all of those kind of little anecdotes that come up every day in our office, where somebody, like we've got a lady who comes in every Wednesday, and she comes in, she says, this is my chore day. I go to the post office, I go and top up here, and my car goes into the garage and stuff. And now the routine of being able to work in town in an environment which is kind of pleasant, it's convenient, and they can kind of do those kind of the things that they'd have to cram in on a Saturday morning is really appealing. And most of our users are kind of working blended. You know, they kind of work a couple of days from home. They may have to travel to somewhere for work with an office, and then they want to come into the town centre 1 or 2 days a week. So that's been a real eye opener to me. I kind of knew it existed, but I see it on a daily basis. So if you're the town where people want to live and they have the chance to work in, you know, globally, then co-working spaces have a place for them in that town, you know. And the other angle that I've actually hadn't even imagined existed, but what I would call it in general terms, business tourism. But basically, these are people who go on holiday, but in our kind of Zoom world, know that they have to do a meeting on a Wednesday morning, and they send the kids off to the farm to go and have the farm experience with somebody in the family, and somebody will have to do a Zoom call, and they're staying in some lovely remote places, and they turn up here and they go, oh, the broadband's rubbish. So I get those phone calls in Easter, Christmas, summer holidays, where people saying, can I come in and use your office? I'm staying in the area, can I work from your office for the day? And that happens all the time, and that's really interesting, because these are people, again, who are coming in, using the town centre, and they're only here for a day or so. But, you know, again, it's kind of a regeneration dividend for a town centre because that facility is available. So many angles to this, which Kerry, I know you know really well. So
yeah, no, it was very much our experience at IndieQ pre the pandemic, and you know, COVID has just ramped up what we saw happening by such a degree. But Victoria, you know, you mentioned e-commerce, and it sounds like you're bringing a lot of businesses into that kind of fold. But COVID really did accelerate the progress of the big online retailers as well. were there any other cultural changes you saw from the pandemic, both good and bad, which will impact the town centres?
Absolutely. I mean, public sector dragged kicking and screaming into Zoom calls and Teams calls was a huge benefit, really. We say here in Wales that we're within arm's reach of people and of our connections, but actually it brought us closer. So we were able to speak to our public sector partners remotely without any hitch. Everyone's using Teams. So those relationships have been able to develop at pace, not just for us, but for anyone working, private public sector partnerships or across public sector. So I think we've made a massive step forward with that. Owen alluded to it earlier that it's also educated a lot of small businesses in remote trading, whatever that might look like for them. Those that realise that, when there is a change, that they need to adapt and grow, change and maybe change their business offering, if you like. So there's one story of a Sunday lunch delivery person who, during the pandemic, then decided that he wasn't going to trade. And actually, the growth of those people serving meals at and delivering them to homes, local pub then picked up on that, run what he called a black kitchen, which allowed him then to continue to trade over that period of time where he wasn't able to have people in the pub. He became the local provider of Sunday lunches, but then it became a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the rest of the week lunches then. Following the pandemic, those people that adapted and including our business actually then retained those customers that they developed better relationships with, the services provided for them at a time that they needed it, and they became loyal then during that time. So I think people have found new customers, new places to go. The co-working bit is a really interesting part for me as well. My business, I'm a RCT resident, and I was looking for co-working and business support back in 2017 and had to go to Caerphilly for that, to Welsh Ice. So, that was then set up by at the time, the Town Square team that are now doing other stuff then across the UK as well. But yeah, I had to travel for my co-working space, which wasn't essentially towns, as we're talking about here. And the benefit of having that co-working space with other people was hugely beneficial as a business startup in itself. However, since the pandemic, running this project with Welsh Government and looking for operational space for me and my team to be able to sit, and because we've got a virtual membership now within that co-working space, for us to actually have a place where we can meet is a challenge for us. So we're looking for local towns where, local to me, local to team members, where we can meet in a local cafe, public house. Connectivity is a huge issue there. And yeah, we would be looking for places like Gwagle that we're able to then make sure that we've got that connectivity for meetings that are virtual, so that we don't dip off those calls that are really important to us. So that opportunity to stay somewhere for longer, buy more things as we're there throughout the day, is a real opportunity for our small businesses as well, which I don't think I don't think they've had their eyes opened to what opportunity that could bring them, and certainly don't know how to promote that to the business community that are now living and working closer to home.
Yeah, I think an awful lot of post-pandemic culture and the environment is still to develop, and it'll be going for the rest of this decade. One of the things I want to get out before we have to wrap, folks, is something which we hear a lot about, and those who aren't in the kind of field might not understand what they are, but we hear a lot about business improvement districts. Do either of you work in those areas? Oh, I'm sure you do. Can you just give us a brief understanding of what they are and how they work?
Yeah, so my track record on that is I project managed the setup for the one for Cardiff City Centre, which is now called For Cardiff. Currently working on the feasibility of one in Wrexham, and have been involved in one that is established in Prestatyn several years ago, and have been involved in various feasibilities in Wales and across England as well. So I work with a company called Mosaic Partnership on these projects as a kind of a supporting hand. So a lot of knowledge. I think the best way to kind of describe a business improvement district is kind of, and let's, these do not have to be just in town centres, but it could be anywhere where businesses are kind of concentrated. So they more commonly town and city centres and industrial areas as well. But you kind of identify an area and you say to those businesses, what improvements do you think need to be made in your area that you're willing to help pay for? So these are ideas and initiatives that are beyond what the public sector is meant to deliver. So they can't deliver public services, but it's like those additional value-added things that you as businesses are willing to dip in your pocket to help deliver, that sometimes the public sector are trying to do, but the money kind of fluctuates. There's no long-term planning that goes behind it. And so you put those ideas into a plan, you cost them, and you say to businesses, well, actually, to deliver this plan, you all are going to have to contribute a certain amount of money every year. Now, the way that amount is considered to be fairly distributed is based on business rates. So if you're a large business, your rateable value is larger. If you're a small business, your rateable value is smaller. So that's kind of the proportionality of this. And then you put it into a business plan and you ask all of those businesses to vote on it. If more businesses vote yes than no, and the number of businesses that vote yes are a large proportion of the business rates, then it goes ahead. And it goes ahead for 5 years, doesn't last forever. And businesses get the chance at the end of the first 5 years to say, do we want to do this again? So that's it in a nutshell. There's about 200 maybe or more in the UK. And what's really interesting, I'm not sure if Chalky's gone for its first 5 years, Victoria, and it's now second term, but I think something like over 90% of bids that have kind of completed their first 5 years get voted in again by businesses second time round, because they actually do what they say they do on the tin, and I think that's really important here. So while some will present them as potentially a tax on business, I think if you look at it as a business-led organization that's delivering business priorities with business funding and being accountable for that, I think that's a different way of seeing it. And I do think that they're now well established in the UK, and I think they are really worthwhile to look at in all of our town centres. So
what we've taken from the relationships that we've developed with some bids is that public-private sector relationship. So they form a limited company which has got predominantly business owners, and I split out public-private sector because those private businesses are often more commercially savvy. They actually know what they want from their area, and as Owen said, they ask them up front, what would you like to provide for your area that obviously public sector are not tasked with actually doing? They often have the answers to that. And by them sitting as part of a board on the private limited company, whilst having representation from the local public sector, that relationships allows the private sector to develop that and operate that business improvement district, whilst ensuring that those strings can be pulled of public sector when support is needed. And I think that's really, really critical. A sense of ownership of a place, and not sort of like cap in hand going, what is the council doing for me? That's a huge challenge at the moment, where people don't really understand where the boundaries of public sector are and what is expected of the local council. But giving them a sense of ownership and that contribution, and in a lot of cases is about, say, 2% of what they would be paying as part of their business rates. Charities are sometimes exempt. And in some of the towns we've worked with, 33% of the bid levy, that pot of money that is collated at the end of it, 33% is by the big chains, who often, some of them have got policies and just following suit, and just whatever the small businesses want, the independents want, they'll just follow. Some of them have got an automatic yes. A lot of them really do understand their contribution to their local community and already have a policy in place to support these things as well. So whilst it is a small tax on an increment on their tax to some of these independents, some are exempt because of the size of their business, and it's usually the big anchor institutions that are contributing the majority of that. So we've seen some real positive noise when it's done properly, and some of the towns that Owen has mentioned, they really are working well, and that they are implemented in a way that is positive in those areas.
I was just going to add, so this is going back to where I like to see some thought and innovation from Welsh Government. So just to clarify, bids ask for payment from the occupier of a business. So it's the shop, it's the service deliverer, it's the kind of the person who's earning a living. And but we have seen in England property owner bids. So the difference is that you levy a cost on the owner of the building, not the occupier. And this is often done where you already have an existing bid in place. And that's a mechanism by drawing in those property owners. And so the plan that might be delivered in parallel with one that is about, marketing, promotion, safe, clean and green town centres that most bids kind of focus on is maybe something that's got a much more stronger property drive. And that needs a bit of legislation in Wales for us to do that. But we're not looking at that at the moment that I'm aware of. But that will address one of the issues that's raised in the policy statement about fragmented ownership, absentee landlords, because if you have a property owner's bid, you draw all of those in. So we know there's mechanisms in place. They've already been used in places in England. We could be thinking about doing that here in Wales. And I kind of would like to see at least some kind of conversations around that, because I think that's where we need to be thinking going forward, you know.
I just want to say thank you both so much for coming on the show this evening. But before you go, I do have one, very easy, not at all contentious question at all. But so much in the last few years has been made of the UK government's levelling up agenda. Do you think that Wales has seen any sort of material benefits from the money invested in Wales? And how do you think that's going to work in the future for Wales in terms of replacement? Well, I suppose you can't really call the levelling up fund replacement EU funding. It's very similar to sort of town growth funds in the UK. But this money that is purporting to be replacement EU money, what do you see for the future of that? Owen, do you want to take that one?
Oh, do you know, I reckon you could have a whole podcast on this subject.
I think we've tried to have a whole podcast on this subject. Remember, we'll take the little snippets and turn into Regeneration.
I kind of sum it up like this. Yes, you do see material benefit whenever money's spent in Wales. I like to think that we do spend it well. I think the criticisms that you can level at this is that we've gone from it is not a direct replacement for European money, but we kind of see it as our kind of Brexit dividend, don't we? Politicians would argue we're not getting as much money as we used to get, which is kind of for others to kind of argue and debate. However, I like to think that local authorities are now in an empowered position because in many cases they're making the decisions, which is good. But I think what we've lost to some extent is that kind of that strategic clout that at least European programs brought, that you could kind of do bigger projects that kind of cross boundaries, that kind of made an impact in terms of some of those project areas that kind of really are difficult and continue to be around productivity, skills and the like. That also came with kind of friction and kind of maybe kind of a sense that there was kind of a machine that was impenetrable in terms of how that was delivered. I think those are things that we could have solved. But so, good that we got the money, but I'd like to think that we can kind of also spend it more strategically as well. And that will be the challenge, I think. And I do take my hat off to Westminster. They saw an opportunity and they took it to be able to kind of influence and shape regeneration in Wales, where it's been the kind of ring fence wall the Welsh Government for many years. But now they're if you're a local authority, you're in a fairly nice position you've got 2 paymasters, and if you're in a council in Wales, you're probably quite enjoying the moment you've got at the present time. So
yeah, what Owen said about local authorities enjoying this moment around being able to have access to 2 parts of funding, but equally there are businesses now that have got access to put submissions in applications for some of this funding to spend as they so wish. The word that I'd probably use in this is sort of dilution. It is being diluted, and I'd like to think that it's not just being used to paint the shop front, because as my own personal business journey, we were fortunate enough to get innovation money from Welsh Government. And those pots are now dwindling, because whereas previously they would have been coming from EU funding, we are witnessing and experiencing, we were part of the process when those pots were shrinking, when this money was then being channeled to other areas. And as my role on the Regional Business Council as well, we've got a huge focus on our growth sectors within our 10 local authorities. And not being able to spend as much money on those is a huge challenge when we know that they're going to be hugely beneficial to the economy, which then incidentally will in turn benefit the towns, make areas more prosperous, and then filter through in a different kind of way. So the dilution happening and the, like Owen said, the local authorities moment to be able to spend this money and to channel that out and satisfy a lot of business owners that they are getting service and that these grant funds are available to them. I'd like to think and hope that they're not just being used for a lick of paint somewhere, that they're being used strategically. They are being filtered down to grassroots level rather than being used up here in innovation by some of the larger public sector organisations for our growth sectors as well. So yeah, sitting on the fence with that. Businesses have benefited, local authorities have benefited, but I'm definitely seeing a challenge when it comes to some of our growth sectors, which in turn will impact the economy and innovation as well. So yeah, what the balance is and how they do that, I don't know.
Thank you to both of you again for coming on the show. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. If people want to hear more from you, where can they go and find you on Twitter, Owen?
It's Owen Davies at Twitter.
Wonderful. Victoria?
At ManAbout, @Mann_about, Mann_about.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard this evening, please don't forget to find Hiraeth on all the socials at HiraethPod. Go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. And thank you very much for supporting us with your ears. But if you would like to do so with your wallet, you can go to www.patreon.com/HiraethPod. Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review.